after committing his first murder. The New York man felt restless if he didn't kill someone every day. One day, he targeted a young woman who was walking home alone. He followed her all the way to her doorstep, waiting to strike as she opened the door. But just as he reached the door, the woman's boyfriend appeared and opened the door, scaring the man away, making him flee the scene. Even though his attempt failed, the New York man didn't give up. He waited until 2 a.m. when everyone was asleep and began trying to open windows, searching for a victim. After countless attempts, he finally found a window that was left open. He skillfully climbed into the house. When he saw the family photo in the living room, the New York man smiled with satisfaction, confirming that the daughter in the photo slept alone. He quietly made his way to the girl's bedroom. However, his footsteps woke the girl from her sleep. As soon as she opened her eyes, the man struck her head with a wrench, hitting her dozens of times before finally stopping. He then stripped the girl of her clothes, doused her in kerosene, and set the house on fire. Satisfied with his work, he left. The next day, when the police arrived at the scene, they found the girl burned beyond recognition, and the house completely destroyed. The fire had erased all traces, leaving no evidence behind, causing the case to fall into a deadlock again. But on the second night after the incident, the New York man couldn't resist the urge again. He continued to try breaking into other houses, just like before, until he found one with an open window. He entered the house and began searching the rooms. But this time he found only a man, no women, which was not to his liking. He decided to steal some money and quietly leave. However, the noise of him stealing the wallet woke the man in bed. Realizing he had been caught, the New York man attacked the man with the wrench. The two struggled, and the noise woke the man's father, who came to the room and together with his son subdued the New York man. That night, the police arrested the New York man for breaking and entering. During the investigation, the police realized that this man matched the profile of a serial killer who had been active recently. The next day, the criminal investigation team interrogated the New York man. He was very cautious at first, only admitting to breaking into the house and not mentioning anything about the murders. It wasn't until the investigators used psychological tactics that he began to talk. The New York man revealed that when he was 10 years old, he had been taken to the mountains and molested by an old man. Since then, he had been terrified of old men. While serving in the military, he had been bullied by other soldiers. 6 years ago, he was convicted of rape and imprisoned, where he was raped by death row inmates. In the eyes of other men, he was always a victim, which is why he only dared to attack women. The New York man made a deal with the investigators. If he confessed to his crimes, he wanted to be placed in a single cell where he would not be bullied. To soothe him and secure his confession, the investigator patted him on the shoulder and assured him that he would be protected in prison and that the guards would be instructed to take special care of him. This promise of protection, something the man had never experienced before, finally broke him down, and he confessed to his crimes. That afternoon, the police searched his home and found the shoes with the soles completely worn down, which explained why no footprints were found at the crime scenes. They also found the small knife he had used in his previous murders. After several twists and turns, the case was finally solved. The New York man couldn't go a day without killing a woman. He would drive around late at night, looking for victims. Once a woman got into his car, he would strangle her to death and then dump her body into the sea. One day, he drove to a bus stop and saw a woman waiting for a bus. He asked her for directions and they began chatting. After the woman gave him directions, he pretended not to understand and asked her to get into the car to guide him. The woman initially refused, knowing not to get into a stranger's car at night. However, the man played on her sympathy, saying he hadn't understood her directions and asked her to repeat them. The woman leaned into the car window and pointed out the directions again. When she noticed a photo of the man with 2 dogs on the dashboard, this warm image eased her concerns and she got into the car. Little did she know, this was the beginning of her nightmare. As they approached her home, the man didn't stop. When the woman asked him to, He ignored her, locked the doors with a sinister smile, and punched her when she tried to call for help. He then grabbed her by the hair and smashed her head against the car. After killing her, he put her body in a bag and threw it into the sea. For a killer like him, the thrill of murder was addictive, and he couldn't stop. A few days later, he continued his spree, this time targeting a girl in a red dress at a bus stop. He used the same approach, asking for directions. This method was very effective on women. The warm photos in his car, along with the cold winter wind, convinced the girl to get into his car. Just as she sat down, the bus arrived. For safety reasons, she thanked him but chose to take the bus instead, a decision that ultimately saved her life. Frustrated by his failure, the man nearly exploded with anger. To release his rage, he went to a karaoke bar and hired a hostess. However, he had no intention of singing. Instead, he lured her outside under the pretext of lighting a cigarette and then attacked her. After killing her, he dismembered her body. A few days later, unable to control himself, he began stalking the bus stop again. Meanwhile, a female college student missed her last bus and was desperately trying to catch it as it drove away. The man saw this and smiled, knowing that she would have no choice but to get into his car. As expected, the girl, who had no sense of danger, fell into his trap after a few words. He took her to a deserted place, tied her hands and feet with a rope, and raped her. After killing her, he dismembered her body as well, ensuring that no one would know what he had done. While the man felt confident in his actions, the police were receiving reports of missing women. Upon investigating, they discovered that all the missing women had disappeared near bus stops. The police suspected that a single person was responsible and that the women might still be alive since no bodies had been found. However, the bus stops were in remote areas with no surveillance cameras. To catch the killer and rescue the women, the police decided to install cameras in the areas where the crimes had occurred, hoping to capture evidence the next time the killer struck. Meanwhile, in a remote mountain area, an old man was digging for wild vegetables when he unearthed a human head. The police arrived and excavated the body, identifying it as the karaoke hostess who had gone missing a few days earlier. However, despite the numerous injuries on the body, the police found no other clues. The lack of evidence in the news report excited the killer, who felt confident and prepared to strike again. This time, after killing another woman, he suddenly became interested in her wallet. Opening it, he found only a few $100s. However, when he saw her bank card, he noticed that she had written her name and PIN on the card. In need of money after committing so many crimes, the man put on a mask and went to the bank to withdraw all the money from the woman's account. A few days later, the police, using the bank's transaction records, identified the suspect from surveillance footage. They tracked the vehicle seen near the ATM to a massage parlor where the man worked and arrested him. During interrogation, the man initially denied everything, believing that the police had no evidence. However, the police had found the blood of the victim on his clothes, forcing him to confess. The police then discovered the remains of several women buried in the mountains behind his house, but the body of the woman thrown into the sea had been washed away and could not be recovered. This horrific series of murders revealed that the killer had been inflicting extreme violence on his victims. Medical examinations showed that the killer had stabbed one girl in the jugular vein, with the knife going all the way through to her heart. He had also left a deep bite mark on the left side of her neck during the assault, treating her as a trophy of his success. The way he tied the victims was similar to the methods used by special forces in the military. These details were eerily similar to an unsolved serial murder case from 34 years ago, where the victims were bound and bitten in the same way. The police retrieved old case files, revealing that the killer had committed 11 murders over 5 years, leaving one survivor. The police had pursued the case for 20 years, but had never caught the killer. Eventually, the statute of limitations expired, and the case was closed. To gather more information, the police brought in an elderly detective who had worked on the case 30 years ago. The detective revealed that there had been a suspect named Kong Jiju, a 20-year-old man with long hair and a handsome face that attracted young girls. However, they had no evidence at the time, so they had to let him go. Kang Jiju then went abroad to study, and no similar cases occurred until 5 years ago when he returned to the country. The police quickly identified Kang Jiju as the prime suspect in the recent murders. During their investigation, they found that Kang Jiju lived a very regular life. He opened his photography studio every day at dawn, worked for 2 hours developing photos, and then went straight home. He didn't show any signs of suspicious behavior. The police knew that if they arrested him without evidence, it would alert him, and he might escape again. To find concrete evidence, the police requested to exhume the body of one of the victims from 34 years ago. When they dug up the body, they were shocked to find that it was almost perfectly preserved. Further examination revealed that the victim had undergone cosmetic surgery, and the combination of hyaluronic acid and fat injections, sealed in a tight environment, had preserved her body, halting decomposition. The forensic team discovered numerous stab wounds on the victim's torso. They scraped off the residue around the wounds and identified the weapon as being made from carbon steel. However, there were thousands of knives made from this material, making it difficult to identify the exact type. The forensic team decided to perform tests using a mannequin and various knives to replicate the depth of the wounds. After thousands of tests, they finally identified the murder weapon as a military-grade double-edged knife. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation. They tracked down the sole survivor of the original series of murders and placed her under hypnosis to help her recall details of the attack. The woman, still traumatized, remembered being hit and knocked out on the street. When she woke up, she saw the killer digging a pit, but she couldn't remember anything beyond that. Tragically, the police couldn't protect her in time. She was found murdered shortly after assisting them, her body displaying the same marks as the previous victims: drained blood, a strangled neck, and her limbs bound in the special military technique. It was clear the killer had struck again to eliminate a witness. During the investigation of the latest crime scene, forensic experts found traces of an oil used by soldiers during the Vietnam War to maintain their weapons. This suggested that the killer might be someone in his 70s, possibly a Vietnam War veteran. The police were running out of time and feared the killer would continue his spree. They decided to arrest Kang Jiju even though they didn't have enough evidence. When they searched Kang Jiju's photography studio, they found nothing incriminating except for a large collection of photos of young women, all taken secretly. As the case seemed to reach another dead end, the forensic team recalled that the first victim's blood had been drained. If the killer had washed away all the blood, they would have needed a significant amount of water. The police immediately checked the water usage records of various residents in the area. After narrowing down the suspects, they found that one house had an unusually high water usage rate. To their shock, the house belonged to the elderly detective who had helped with the case. The prosecutor, pretending to seek assistance, entered the detective's home and found photos of the detective from his time in the Vietnam War. In one photo, he had a military-grade double-edged knife strapped to his leg, the same type used by the killer. Realizing the detective was the true killer who had evaded justice for 34 years, the police arrested him. The detective, who had hidden his crimes for decades, was finally caught. His punishment would be severe. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, awaiting death.